Now the 49th and current Vice President of the US. She is the first female Vice President and the highest ranking female official in US history, as well as the first African American and the first Indian American Vice President. She's a heartbeat away from the presidency. She could just be a year away from launching her own presidential campaign. You all know who I'm talking about. This is Kamala Harris, and she is a phenomenal woman. But we want to understand today what this means for the US and what this means for India. It was just in the news today as we're talking on November 15th. The union minister was very proud that he received a call that the US wants to increase trade with India. And this call came from no other than Kamala Harris. So yes, it is a big deal for India. It's a big deal for Indians. It's a big deal for Indian women and also for women around the world. Today, we're talking with Chidanand Rajghatta, who is out with his new book, Kamala Harris, Phenomenal Woman. He's an Indian-born opinion columnist based in the DC. He is the present foreign opinion columnist and a United States liberal blogger for the Times of India. So with that, Chidanand, a very warm welcome. We're excited to talk about this phenomenal woman.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm happy to talk.
So let's dig right in and tell us. We all think she's phenomenal. All the women are just banding around her, but would love to hear from you. Why do you feel she was phenomenal? And why is that the title of your book?
Yeah, so fundamentally, the title is derived from a very famous poem by Maya Angelou called Phenomenal Woman, which celebrates, womanhood. And the success of women. And I thought it was very striking that Maya Angelou happens to be one of Kamala Harris' favorite poets and also a favorite poet of her mother, Shyamala Gopalan, who was truly phenomenal. The one thing we need to do here is separate Kamala Harris, the person, from Kamala Harris, the politician. Right. So as vice president, she's barely a year into her job, less than a year into her job, and the jury is still out. And even her record as a politician, as a senator, she was a short one-term senator, not even a full-term senator. So it's hard to assess her success as a politician, whether she was a phenomenal politician. But as a person, I think it is. There should be no doubt that hers has been a phenomenal journey. To be a woman of African minority, Black origin, Asian origin, and also many people forget she was single for the longest time.
Till she was 50.
She was 50. And for someone like that to navigate politics in the U.S. and particularly in California, which is a very political state with a lot of strong politicians. Including former presidents. It was very striking, her journey through the hierarchy of politics in California, the way she navigated her career as assistant district attorney, attorney general of the state, which is a large elected office. Attorney general of California is voted on by the entire state, and then of course as a senator, and a senator who succeeded another formidable senator, Barbara Boxer, who was related to Hillary Clinton, and also paired with Dianne Feinstein, another strong personality. All of them white women, incidentally. But so her political journey is truly astonishing. So when I say phenomenal woman, I'm not talking of her performance as a politician, as a vice president. I think that is something we'll be able to judge maybe at the end of her term or maybe well into the future, because it's very hard to judge somebody's record at close proximity. But as a personal journey, the way she has come up through the ranks, navigated her way through the political system in the US, I thought that was very striking, and it deserved the title Phenomenal Women. Also because it is time the United States and the world celebrated the success of a woman in politics. This is a country which for 240 plus years has not had a female, president. And so, like you said, she's just within a heartbeat of the presidency. It's by no means certain she'll get there, but I think just the fact that she's number two in this country and in an office where no woman had ever stepped in before, I thought was worth celebrating, and that's why the title "Phenomenal Woman."
No, her journey has been, as you said, it has been phenomenal. It has really, because the speed at which she rose has been astonishing. But tell us, what were some of those little known things that you learned about Kamala while you were researching this book?
uh, Several things actually. Um, One of the most striking things, of course, was her mother. Her mother's journey is truly astonishing, right? So she comes to the United States when she was 19 in
And
1958.
unheard of in her time and age.
Absolutely unheard of, and you'd understand this because I believe you also lived here, studied here. Uh, Back in the 50s. I mean, remember this was a time of no emails, no internet, no cell phones, no we you literally even in the 80s when I first started corresponding with universities here in the late 70s 80s, you had to actually post your application. You had to send in your application by post. It would take months, and to imagine all this in the 50s was truly, it's something. The persistence with which she kept at it, and also the fact that she was from a fairly conservative Iyer family, a Brahmin Tamil Iyer family. So I thought that was very striking. And so she comes here. In fact, there was some confusion which year she came here. Was it 58? Was it 59? And I found that she actually took a flight out of Calcutta, not Delhi, because her dad was, that's Kamala's grandfather, was serving in Calcutta at that time. And she flies in through Honolulu. So our entry stamp is actually Honolulu, and then comes to San Francisco. And one of the most striking things I discovered was a lot of people assume that Kamala's blackness and her allegiance to the black community, her describing herself as black, comes from her father, who was as Jamaican, Professor Donald Harris, a Stanford economist. And we assume that her mother was Indian, dad was black, Jamaican, and therefore the blackness. No, actually, Kamala's mother, Shyamala Gopalan, turned black. I don't mean literally, but got into the black ecosystem long before she met Donald Harris. In fact, she got into the black ecosystem straight off the boat or plane. On day one, she was for admission, she's standing in a line in Berkeley, and she meets this black activist when they become friends. And this was 2.5 years before she met Donald Harris, right? So I thought it was very striking that this young Iyer girl from Delhi, a Tamil Iyer girl, who has a Brahmin legacy or heritage, so instantly and quickly embraced black ecosystem, and her political consciousness came from there. And this was also very striking. I found, for instance, when Kamala was born, in a birth certificate, the birth certificate entry, her middle name is given as Iyer. So she's Kamala Iyer Harris. And then 2 weeks later, they revise it to Kamala Devi. They file an affidavit to change it to Kamala Devi Harris. And I thought that was very striking. They did not want, my sense is they did not want an association with anything which could be a sort of caste identifier. So yeah, these were some of the things. I mean, there's plenty more in the book.
No, there's so much in the book. I mean, it's so engrossing because, I mean, I did not realize this, but one of the things that I also took away, because Berkeley, I guess at that time, was pretty white. So I can imagine that the blacks, the Indians actually bonded together because they were the minority. That's
Right.
how I kind of read it while I was reading your
Mhm.
book. And I don't know
Right.
if that is correct, but it's like the minority all kind of grouped together to become
Right.
stronger.
Yeah, and I like I described in the book, Berkeley is also a crucible of Indian activism going back, almost 100 years. It was close to the birthplace of the Gadar movement. So there were a lot of Indian students back, 100 years ago, and I thought that was very striking. And as also Kamala's own, during Kamala's own growing up years when she was a toddler, I described, I was quite startled to find that Kamala's parents, Shyamala and Donald Harris, were good friends with Amartya Sen,
Yes.
which I had no idea at all. And because Amartya Sen was teaching for a year or two in Berkeley. And then there's, of course, the Sikh economist, Dr. Ajit Singh, who have
Who had
described
a
him,
profound influence
who
on
had a very profound influence on Kamala Harris. She calls him Ajit
especially
Uncle.
her choosing her college and where she would study.
College, exactly. And so Ajit, Singh actually came and studied in Howard University in Washington, D.C. It's a school Kamala would go to many years later. And this was at a time where, very few Indian students went to HBCUs, which are basically Black universities. I mean, to this day, very few Indian students go to Black universities. So yeah, all this was very striking. I discovered a lot. The ties between Howard University and Mahatma Gandhi and his, acolytes was also a discovery for me. So yeah, it was a journey of discovery for many fronts for me.
No, we'll come back to the Black and the Indian question, but I want to fast forward to 2016 because that seems kind of something that had a major impact on her. Shock, I guess, first because I think nobody expected what happened in 2016. But
Her and about 300 million people.
but she
About 3 billion across
profoundly,
the world.
maybe because of that or that impact, made her the anti-Trump. Please tell us about that, and that was also very critical in her rise.
Right. I mean, I think it's fair to assume that even before that she was anti-Trump or anti-Republican or at least anti-Republican, extreme Republican, simply because of she's a creature of California and California politics. California is a very diverse state now. And Republicanism, has gradually evaporated. Although we keep hearing that now they're making a comeback, and there are some counties and some districts which are turning. But yeah, I think she is a creature of liberal politics, and in fact, it's very interesting that, and I mentioned this in the book. I go into it at some depth that. The entire coterie, her parents' generation and her parents' drawing room friends were all socialists, unabashedly so. I mean, Ajit Singh certainly, Amartya Sen to an extent, Lord Meghnad Desai those days. And in fact, I spoke to Lord Meghnad Desai for this book, and he spoke about how as students, they were always out there, attending rallies, anti-Vietnam Vietnam War rallies, and reading and talking about Cuba and all the ferment of that time. So she grew up in a very, I'd say, socialist setting and a socialist household. So when conservatives today, or the right-wing Republicans, call her a socialist, well, there's an element of truth to that. Although my sense is she's moved a little more, or she's become a little more centrist now. She's not like hard left. She's not a part of the so-called squad, or the socialist squad, or the gang of progressives like Ilhan Omar and Ocasio-Cortez. She's a little more moderate, and she's a little more restrained. Now, the trappings of office has probably restrained her even more, but she's definitely of liberal bent, and I think it's a no-brainer that she's anti-Trump, and not just because of the political orientation. I think even as a woman, as a feminist,
we're all anti-Trump. But I want to get into something that's very interesting, is because we've seen world leaders. In India, you've had women leaders. In Europe, you've had women leaders. Why did it take so long in the US to actually finally get a woman in such a senior position? Why was it so hard to break the glass ceiling there? We think of the US as being so progressive.
Is it possible we are wrong? So yeah, that's the short answer. I mean, the US, like India, the US is a country of many parts, right? So even today, like you look at Kamala's strengths, or the strength of the progressive, liberal constituency, it's East Coast and West Coast. The middle America, which the liberal elites deride as flyover country, is a conservative bastion. It's a place where women still are struggle to make a mark. It's a male dominant society. It's the patriarchy exists very much in the US. We can pretend it doesn't. It's one thing. All the advertising slogans are written by people in New York and people in California. The movies are made by people in California. So if you go back to the 70s, I don't know if you remember, there was a cigarette called Virginia Slims.
Yes.
And their slogan was, "You have come a long way, baby." And they celebrated it, showing a woman smoking, which was considered a sign of liberation. I don't know why. In retrospect, that's so horrible. But that was true only of the liberal constituency. But otherwise, women have struggled to make a mark. It's a male-dominated society, as it is in many parts of the world. Only now, in certain very small, pockets in Scandinavian or Nordic countries, you see that change. That has changed. It's also changed in parts of India. I'm delighted to say that. But otherwise, it is incredibly difficult for women to break the glass ceiling. 240 years, 45 presidents, all male, and 44 of them white male. It's just been hard. And remember, I think in the book I make the point that when the suffragette movement and the right to vote for women was passed, the law was passed in the US, women were already voting in Madras in British India. Right, Indian women had the right to vote. So this country, in that sense, was behind the curve.
And I think it's very hard for a lot of people, I think, sitting in India to even think that, because we think of the US as being so much more progressive with so much more freedom for women. So that's why I wanted to bring that up. But one of the questions I have, and especially in your book, you even say that all evidence suggests that Kamala will be the most consequential and powerful whip in US history. Why do you feel that way?
Simply because of the amount of workload, her portfolio. I mean, look, as we speak, she's just come back from a 4-day visit to France, right? Biden sent her there to repair damaged relations with France. I mean, this is an alliance which has fractured over the whole submarine deal with Australia. But she was sent to fix this. She was deputed to fix the border issue, the whole immigration issue, the border crisis. I mean, some of the biggest problems of today have landed on her plate, and this has never happened in vice presidential history. I mean, look, I've been here 27 through 4 presidencies, and 6-8 terms, and every vice president had 1 or 2 major sort of jobs. Some of them significant. I mean, Dick Cheney was a powerful vice president simply because George Bush was considered a novice in the White House, and he was a former, defense guy. So he handled a lot of defense. Al Gore was, of course, all about, environment and internet and technology, these specific areas. Kamala Harris, I mean, starting with, heading the Space Force to border to foreign policy. I mean, it's incredible. And this is in a country where for the longest time, and in the book, there's a whole chapter I've written on vice presidential history. They were considered, so lightweight. Some of them were, dissolute.
Yeah, but it's true. Even though the VP is a very powerful, because you could be next in line, but it's also almost like a perfunctory role also.
Yeah. Till into the 80s, vice presidents were best known for going for, funerals of,
Wherever the president didn't want to go.
Yeah. They attended funerals, and it was a joke. And even further, before that, before the 25th Amendment, which actually conferred, this whole line of succession business, that when a president dies, the vice president succeeds. Before that, it was a joke, and so there are these really funny stories which I've recounted in the chapter on vice presidents, on how, some of them were, they didn't even have a home in Washington, D.C. Yes. They had to, stay in rented accommodation. Some of them were broke. They were scoundrels, drunkards. One of them died on a railway platform. It was just crazy. And you read all that and say, oh my God. So yeah, no, she is purely in terms of work profile. It's quite incredible. And in fact, the complaint today, so today, as we speak, there's a big
There's a
story on
lot of questioning, right?
there's a huge story on CNN which basically says, and I've been reporting this and I've been saying this too for a long time, that there's a certain tension between, not
Biden.
Biden himself and Kamala Harris. I think they are good with each other, but between the two staffs, right? They both have, this very strong willed staffers. And the essence of the story actually is the complaint from the Harris group is that she has too much work, that she's
They're
been
giving her too much power.
laden with too much on her plate, and she can't handle it all because, and all of them are really tough issues. They're intractable issues, right? Particularly this whole immigration border crisis. I mean, generations of presidents haven't been able to solve some of these problems. And voting rights, which is another really potent issue, which can define this thing. So in terms of job profile, I don't think anyone will doubt that she is truly the most, consequential. If she pulls it off, if she comes out of it, right, it'll be incredible. It'll actually secure probably her nomination and further in future days. But the chances of that, I mean, that's like you having to score, since it's a cricket season, 24 or 36 runs in the last over,
No, but it reminds me of the guffaw that Biden made when he said, what would happen if him and Kamala Harris ever got into this type of a situation, right? And he said he
Right.
would resign.
Yeah. No, look, they've been individually, they've been very respectful of each other, and I think they understand each other. I mean, look, Biden was already vice president when Kamala Harris became senator.
Yes.
And if you remember, he actually swore her in as a senator because he was the vice president. And there's a very cordial relationship. He's a very, fatherly figure who is, respectful of Harris, and it's very obvious. But yeah, the aides are always a problem. I think in any setup, even in a normal setup, there's always a little bit of jostling. The vice president's office always feels sidelined because the White House is all powerful. Even structurally, if you see, the vice president's office is in the old executive building, which is a horrible looking building right next door to the White House, which actually deserves to be demolished. So I think they all resent.
But let's talk a little bit about Kamala. She sat at the glass ceiling definitely, but we got a new term, the first gentleman. But no matter how far women rise, we cannot get over this question of symbols of style. We have to still, and she is still judged, no matter where she goes, about her clothes, what she wore, who designed what. There's even a website, as you mentioned in your book, of what did the VP wear. So it is immense amount of pressure, because we are talking about not only do you have to do a great job, but you're constantly judged on how you look and what you wore. I don't think it's so much so for any male VP. And when are we going to get over this, that women in power, but we constantly have to bring it down to style and grace?
It's just the nature of the beast, Sukirti. I don't think this will ever go away. And it's true not just of America, not just of politics, in every sphere of, human life and endeavor and everywhere. I mean, I could be wearing a shirt, with soup stain on it, and, people say, okay,
he's busy.
Yeah, whatever, they will make excuses for it. But yeah, you're right. Women are judged and held up to a different standard. It's somehow, drilled into our system. If a woman does something like that, she's characterized as either, careless or whatever. It's a deeply discriminatory thing, which I don't see it going away in our lifetime. And same thing with Kamala Harris. I mean, the report, for instance, today, the CNN story, the addendum to it in all the right-wing media focuses on her laughter, for instance. For some reason, people find her, laugh very irritating. Nobody would ever say that of a guy. right? Of a male. I mean, George Bush had a funny laugh, but everyone treated it as funny. He had that humorous, and they thought it was funny. It's humorous. It was a matter of, satire and this thing. But uh, they'd never allow a woman to get away with a laughter which was not considered normal, or she cackles, or it is just so deeply discriminatory, and it's so ingrained in our system. It's not just Kamala Harris, it's not just America, it's not just politics, it's across the world.
No,
And
and it's also women judging women, right? Because this
oh,
is
yeah,
not only about
yeah. And I mentioned that also in the book, that some of the biggest takedowns of Kamala Harris has come from her own constancy. And so, yeah, it's a fact. Women are judged really harshly.
Now, one question this always comes back to is about Kamala's identity, Black, Indian, both. In her memoir, Kamala also talks about her mother and how she was raising two Black daughters. She always says, I'm Black and I'm proud of being Black. I was born Black. I will die Black. Kamala Harris doesn't she seem to mention much that she was born Indian. And during her campaign, also, she presented herself mostly as a Black candidate. Was that more because of the politics? Because we Indians adopted her very quickly and said, no, no, she's Indian.
Yeah, it's a complicated question. So let me try and unpack it bit by bit. Uh, the one thing is, you're right. I mean, as Indians, we tend to embrace anything
Anyone successful.
successful anywhere in the world. Like even one person Indian, we immediately Indian American, Indian whatever wins this, does that kind of thing. So we are like that only, to paraphrase a favorite line back home. But with Kamala Harris, let's understand that her mother, at a very young age, got into the Black ecosystem. And I can imagine it was at a time in Berkeley where there were not a whole lot of Indian families, and an Indian support system, right? I mean, Cali now, of course, there are a lot of Indians in Bay Area. It's a huge constancy. It's quite incredible. Actually, in 2000, I actually wrote a book on the whole Silicon Valley ecosystem with Indian entrepreneurs. And one of the lines I heard from an Indian guy was, he said, all you have to do is have a brown ass in Silicon Valley and they'll throw money after you, because they were considered, Indians is considered so entrepreneurial and successful and this thing. Not so in the late 50s, when Kamala's mother came, and she fell in with the sort of Black ecosystem and Black culture very early and very easily. And of course, she married Donald Harris, who was from Jamaica a little later. And I can imagine, and I can only surmise this because her mother passed away and I couldn't talk to her, but from conversation with her, mother's circle and friends, that it did not meet with a high degree of approval. And I'm putting that mildly. To put it bluntly, Indians, I say this generically, we are racist. Not just racist. We Indians discriminate on multiple levels, right? We are the most discriminating people on earth, and I don't mean it in a complimentary way. We discriminate on race, on religion, on color, culture, wealth, on everything, right? So I can't imagine, although from what I hear from her uncle and aunt, her parents did not particularly actually, the only objection they had was she didn't inform them.
Yes, that's what you write in your book.
Well in advance, but otherwise they had embraced it. And probably because I know for a fact that you also grew up in Liberia, and Kamala's grandfather served in East Africa. So I assume there was some amount of acceptance of Black culture, and so they did not mind that. But I can imagine growing up, it would have been very hard. And one thing I know is Indians in the US can be even more racist than Indians in India, right? I mean, somehow, we were discussing Mississippi masala before.
It caused an uproar. I mean, when I was growing up, we all got the Mississippi masala lecture.
Yeah. The idea of, I know very few Indians who actually either date or married or have mixed marriages with, people of African extract or black extract. So, and then Shyamala Gopalan Harris marries, has these two daughters, and their parents split up. They separate when they're in the Midwest, and Shyamala has to come back to Berkeley. And she comes back with two young daughters, single mother, with a full-time job. She's a scientist and a very busy one at that. And what support structure does she have? Right?
But I love the support structure that you showed, that she had two surrogate mothers who she was very, very close to.
Absolutely. So it was all Black women, strong Black women. She comes back to Berkeley, to Oakland, and there's this whole Black support structure which helps her when she goes to the lab. And in fact, I described that when Kamala's mother had to spend long hours at the lab, late into the night, the young girls, toddlers, literally lived in the Black household next door, growing up on, that culture. So I think the loyalty, her allegiance to, and her affinity to the Black culture comes from that time. Because apparently in the early days, for instance, Kamala's mother, Shyamala, would take them to the temple in Berkeley. There's a temple, I think, in Livermore, one of the earliest temples. And apparently the girls would go there with her mother, but I think her life as a scientist got busy. And over time, her mother just let them go on Sundays to the Black church with her godmothers, with her neighbors. And so gradually she embraced, her Blackness more and more. Culturally, and this is really very striking, and I found that quite intriguing. In culture and culinary terms, there's still a strong Indian streak.
Yeah, because they love to eat idli dosa, right?
It is true. That's not a put on. That's not a put on. Although I do believe that in terms of culinary sort of interest and skill, she's probably the most gastronomic vice president in history.
That's right? What you said. She's a great cook.
She's really into food. I've heard really crazy stories. Like, she goes on this campaign, and if she eats something good, she wants to know the recipe. She actually harangues. She goes into the kitchen of the restaurant or whatever to try and find out the recipe. So she's very accomplished in culinary terms. She talks a great deal of her, kitchen and cooking and her skills and her methods. But even otherwise, for instance, she's still close to the Indian side of her family.
Yes.
Right? In fact, today, I think the CNN story still also talks about her family, closeness to her family, including the family in India, her aunts, her chittis. The word chitti became famous during her campaign because he genuinely refers to her as chittis, and calls them their Zoom calls, and she engages with her family, which is our mother's been passed for quite some years now, but she still retains ties with her family, which is fantastic. And I've seen, there are campaign videos even before the whole vice presidential race, even when she ran, I think for, I'd say, one of her Senate campaigns or Attorney General campaigns, where there's one video I saw where she's in the middle of a speech and she turns around and says, she's talking about a family, and she says, "Chinny, where's Chinny?" And Chinny is her aunt who lives in Canada. So she's obviously she has strong family ties with the Indian side of her family. And I believe even, during her visits to India, she not only visits her aunt and uncle, but also Ajit Singh's family in Chandigarh.
Well, we're waiting for her to come this time. I think it's going to be a lot of very grand.
As usual, our media will go completely over the top.
But one thing that Kamala keeps saying, that she's still constantly explaining her name. So tell us a bit about Kamala Devi and who is she named after and her name, because she still has to explain it quite a bit.
Yeah, so that was another interesting discovery. And so like I said, she was born Kamala. Her mother, obviously picked her name. By the way, her dad was also very familiar with the whole Indian culture, Indian ecosystem. He's Jamaican, and as you know, in the Caribbean, there is a significant Indian population, not so much probably in Jamaica as, say, in Trinidad or Guyana. which have very large, population of people of Indian heritage. But her dad was familiar, and also because, so it's interesting that her dad became friends with Ajit Singh first. Actually, Ajit Singh became friends with Kamala's dad first, before Kamala's mom met him. And so it was because of Ajit Singh actually that Donald Harris actually visited India and actually taught at the Delhi School of Economics. I found out, which was another surprising discovery,
Yes.
that Kamala's dad was in Delhi at the Delhi School of Economics, and Kamala was, I think, a toddler at that time, probably I'd say 4 or 5, because the journey that was described to me was her parents went to Zambia or East Africa, where her grandfather was serving, and they left Maya, the younger daughter, there. And then Kamala, Shamala, and dad came to Delhi, and they were there for 3 or 4 months. So it was interesting that he was also familiar with Indian culture, so he may have been a party to naming her Kamala. And like I said, the middle name was Iyer. Why it was changed to Devi is intriguing, and I spoke to a lot of people. None of them could authenticate it, but the sense I got, and some of them, at least 2 people suggested this, that Devi comes from Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, who was a feminist activist during the freedom movement. And Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay came to the US in around 1938, which was the year Shamala Gopalan was born. And she was a very ardent votary of strong ties between India and Indian nationalists and Black Americans at that time, right? So she was a wonderful feminist activist, and it's entirely possible that Devi comes from there. Unfortunately, this is just surmising.
Yes, no, we're still trying to guess that. But one of the interesting things that always, of course, comes up is politics is very dirty, it's very ugly. And the rise of Kamala as a political figure, there's been a lot of put downs, a lot of insinuations about her climbing her way to the top, from DA to Attorney General to Senator to VP. There have been lots of allegations and insinuations. And many have even questioned her Black heritage because they say she's not truly Black, she's Jamaican. Tell us about that, because, they give no respite in any area.
Like I said, these are hurdles, which are special, to women. A guy could have the worst, private life, multiple affairs. Classic example, Donald Trump, right? And somehow they get away with it. But a woman, if she's successful, you put her entire life under a microscope, starting with whether she inhaled when she was 21 or, who was a boyfriend when she was in school. It's just incredible. So yeah, like many women, Kamala has had to navigate all that. And which is why I call her phenomenal, because she's strong. You have to be strong to get through that kind of, muck. And she is tough. She is tough as nails. And yeah, look, heritage is, it's always, how do I put it? It's difficult, when you come from mixed culture and mixed heritage. There are so many influences, and I think about it. My own kids are of mixed race, and we try and give them the best we can of Indian values, American values. My wife is American, but who knows how they will turn out? They might they might be strongly Indian, strongly American, mix of both, neither. They might revolt and say we are universalists or humanists. Who knows? But it's difficult. And then to get into public life and politics, where you have to be constantly on the lookout for poll numbers, and position yourself accordingly. It's natural, but she's done it in a skillful way, and she I think she embraces the essential Blackness which she grew up. I don't think anyone should have a quarrel with it. That's the ecosystem which nourished and nurtured her primarily, right? There was no Indian auntie, right? I mean, can you imagine in Berkeley when her mother was, single, going to the lab for, 12 hours or 14 hours, if there was an Indian auntie circle nearby, which of course is available now, but back in those, she might have, grown up more Indian and embraced her, Indian self more. But hell, it was her black aunties who, nourished her and nurtured her. So why should anyone have an issue with that? And at the same time, she still, she doesn't announce it her Indian side grandly, but she doesn't disown it by any stretch of imagination. So I think it's a happy Y media.
But at least what I learned when I was reading your book, because when I saw it, that she has really embraced diversity and inclusiveness. Because if you look at her sister, you look at her parents, you look at her own marriage, it is very cross cultural. So, I mean, I even can't say she's black or she's this or she's Indian, because when you look at the influences that have surrounded her, it's really definitely very, very cross cultural.
Absolutely. In fact, both in terms of race, religion, it's a very mixed family, and it's a truly modern American family, right? If you look at
and it's really good to see, because that was what I think from your book I took away, that diversity, that she really has. It's very vast. You've got Jewish influences, you've got Asian influences, you've got Indian influences, you've got Black, and you've got American influences,
and Hispanic also, because I believe her uncle Bala was in Delhi. His wife was Mexican, so they have Kamala's cousin is Mexican Indian, so to say.
So there we go.
I mean, it's a modern American family, and I think that's wonderful. That speaks to what this country is all about.
No, it does, and I loved seeing that, and I love the one fact that you showed strength, that she was not easily bullied, because Trump is such a big bully, and her being able to stand up to him. Tell us a little bit about that, because that took a lot, because anybody standing up to Trump, because he just tuck attacks.
Right. Yeah. No, truly, and I believe that was one of the factors which led Biden to pick her as his running mate, because remember there were several other candidates who were in the mix. Biden had said that he's going to pick a woman, but he eventually settled on her. And this was one of the factors, because she's not easily bullied, and she had the ability to, snap back at Trump. She's a strong personality, and which is why she can be very polarizing. I mean, she's tried to position herself a little more sort of moderate center. But she can be polarizing, and there are Republican women who absolutely hate her, as do Republican men, of course. But strong personality and the ability to stand up to Trump-like figures. So the conversation right now is whether she will be a presidential candidate in the next election cycle in 2024, because in this country everyone starts talking about not just the next election, the election after that,
right? Because it's next year they have to start deciding pretty soon.
Yeah, 2024, 2028. So they're already sort of, and usually the vice president is a strong contender for the nomination, but the conversation right now is, although Biden has said that he'll run in 2024, nobody seriously expects him, because he's going to be 82 at that time, and 86 if he wins and finishes a term, which sounds improbable. So they're all looking at Kamala Harris and whether she has it in her to win the nomination. Now, as somebody holding the vice presidential office, you'd have a head start, you think. But you'd have a head start if you had one or two easy portfolios, and you had a lot of time to position yourself, right? This is a vice president who is like loaded with work. I mean, it's incredible how much she has had to juggle. And the conspiracy theory is that Biden has put so much on her plate that she's bound to fail.
I would say it the other way. He's so old, that's why he's putting it all on her. No, I'm just
also possible. But in the off chance that she succeeds, and I really, to be honest, don't see it happening, because these are intractable problems. Some of them are really, really intractable problems. I mean, it has defied solution for generations. Then, of course, she'd be a shoo-in, but she'll have to fight it, through the Democratic Party. And this is a party which is incredibly fractured right now. It's like a circular firing squad.
Yes.
If you followed the debate and all the tortured discussion over their infrastructure,
Especially with the Republican wins that are happening and stuff. So
yeah, and the Democrats are busy killing each other right now. So I don't know. It seems such a distant shot, but I think right now it's all about survival for her.
but there are a lot of expectations that rest on her shoulders. So I mean, I think it's going to be it's going to be an interesting year ahead. Any closing thoughts you have as we end for today? Because I learned so much through your book, and of course I got more fascinated about her personal life than I did about the political life.
Right. Yeah. The one thing that bothers me, that concerns me, is that this should not be seen as a test as to whether women can be successful, right? So to me, it seems almost as if a lot of Americans are ready to say, all right, there, we gave a woman a chance to be vice president and she blew it, or she couldn't do it, or she was, to write off women. And my fear is that if that happens, we may not have another woman in high executive office for the next 15 or 20 years. And I don't want my daughter to grow up thinking it's out of reach. The fact is, women have been wonderfully successful leaders in many places across the world. Most notably, Angela Merkel has just finished 4 terms, or so, as Chancellor of Germany. And there are many, many successful stories, which is why I actually begin, if you notice, the book begins with all these fictional female presidents.
Veep.
Yeah. And I don't think that they should be, confined to fiction. I think America should be ready to embrace a female president. It may not be, Kamala Harris. It could be anybody. I don't even mind if it's a Republican. But the fact that, women have been kept out of high office for so long, largely because of the kind of hurdles they have to face in the way people assess them, the public assesses them, that should change. And so for that reason alone, more than anything else, I hope she does well. She may not be able to solve all problems. She may not even win the Democratic nomination for the next election. But as long as she, solves some of the issues, or at least comes out having done a good job and gets high marks, if not full marks, that would be a happy development for America and for the rest of the world. In fact, like I've said, there are so many places in the world where women have succeeded, but very often, there's always this dynastic tag to it, that they're either the spouse or daughter, or some existing male politician who's deceased. So it always gives me great joy to see a woman, including in India. You may not agree with Mamata Banerjee or Mayawati, but the fact that these are women who made it by their own, without so much family ties, that should instill confidence in women across the world, and America needs it.
No, definitely. I think we all need it. We are all rooting for her. Well, thank you so much. It was honestly, first, when I was looking at this book, I thought it would be a heavy political read, but I really loved it. And because it explains so much about her, and you get into various shades. And like you said, it's her journey. You understand her, you understand how she has become the person that she is today. So I loved your book. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Sukirti. Thank you very much. It's wonderful talking to you. Thank you.